So with that, we'll just open it up. We don't have necessarily a structure, but we would love to hear any and all feedback and comments you all have. Yes?
I'd like to know what other projects your company has worked on that we might know about
In what?
in Connecticut.
A lot of work in Norwalk, around the Norwalk Maritime Center up to Reed Putnam. The redevelopments along the riverfront there are people really know quite a bit about. I think that thinking about other ones there were other ones underway over in Stamford that are in some of those districts. In the greater Boston area, the Charleston Navy Yard redevelopment, Assembly Square in Somerville, the Central Artery Park System on top of the freeway that was put below grade. We did the planning for the whole park system. South Boston Waterfront, the High Technology Centers and Innovation Center District, we did quite a lot of work on those projects over the years. So those are just a few. I don't know. Online we brag a lot about all the different things. You can look online.
Have you completed projects in communities that didn't have a hired town planner?
Yeah, in a sense, I want to make sure that we're not the developers. We come in as consultant planners and designers to assist communities, and we certainly have worked in communities that have not had a planner or have had part-time consulting assistance. Notably, for several years, Tiverton, Rhode Island, has been a community that has been between planners quite a bit, for example, working with them in their town center.
And I can tell you from experience, because I live in Norwalk, and that's actually where.
Oh yeah, actually that's true.
And
he was on the steering committee for the first project I ever did. In Norwalk, and it was just a couple years ago, right?
yeah, just last week.
A long time ago. That's right.
But there is a planning commission and a planning and zoning staff in Norwalk. But their involvement in the kind of planning that Steve does is relatively minimal. I mean, they're actually there, they're there and they listen, but they're the ones that actually go out to implement it rather than be part of the visioning. This is where the vision comes from, and the planning and zoning guys and redevelopment people, they are there to implement these things.
As far as your big scope of this engagement, I mean, where do you hand this off? Because you didn't have to change anything on here as far as I'm concerned. I mean, my thing, this is wonderful. My only being a cynic is, how are we ever going to make this come to fruition?
Yeah.
And then number 6 and 7 was the marketing and the outreach and the vision and the kind of galvanizing of the town. I mean, where do you see the biggest barriers in just your experience on taking plans like this and actually having them start?
Well, here's the thing, the way to look at it is, I don't know if I'm an amateur gardener, even though I'm a landscape architect, I'm still an amateur at this. And I can't make tomatoes grow, but what I can do is I can create the environment and the opportunity for plants to grow. And that's really when we're looking at this. You as a town can't make the development go, but what you can do is create the opportunities for people, and you're doing that right now in a very, very successful way. And there are going to be some steps along the way. So what we've recommended is you get the zoning in place, reasonable zoning in place, ahead of time that says, we don't know what's coming, but we would certainly like these kinds of things to come to the door, because what happens with developers these days around New England, they often come forward with an idea, the zoning doesn't work, people don't know each other, it gets to be a battle, it gets to be a fight, there's misunderstandings, it takes years often. But if the town can say, gee, these are the things we'd like to invite people to do, and by the way, if you want to do one of those other things, don't even come and talk to us, you're setting the stage, you're setting the ground. And so we're recommending that you work within the process that you have and reset the zoning for your industrial zone, etc. We think that another key thing, and this is where the Connecticut Trust is such an important partner in all of this, is here, and hopefully we'll continue to work with you on this, I'm sure they will, the notion of setting an historic district in place. That's worked, a lot of the homework's already been done, but a key idea here is drawing a lasso around the property that has the historic buildings on it, Unilever property. Why is that important as an idea? by creating a district, you can make sure that they're within that district, rather than being an individual structure. They may not recognize on their own the potential value that the historic tax credits have. People, when they hear about, gee, the government's going to come in and designate my property as something really important, there's got to be some issues there. There aren't. But by drawing that into them, you're actually creating an opportunity. They may or may not use it, but they may very well find, and what we've predicted, is the light bulb's going to go off in the future, saying, boy, if we could use historic tax credits and help finance the redevelopment of the 1930s building, they win and you win. So you can accelerate that. That's setting the garden and getting in place. Some of this is advocacy for yourselves, and some of it is some of the smart marketing already underway. So you see Kit Bergstrom is coming to speak in May. Kit Bergstrom is very central within the state economic development. He's a person who is working constantly to identify responsible entities to work with communities. And by making those links, you will be expanding the opportunity. One final note I'll make about this, because this is important to understand. When you look at the redevelopment of industrial properties, the owners of industrial properties live in a world where selling things, whether it was Pond's Cream or some other manufactured product, that's what drives their day. That's what drives their businesses. Real estate and real estate that they're not using is not a big part of what their concerns are. They're not that they're anti-town or anti-development. They're into manufacturing stuff. So they're funny sorts of neighbors to have when you're thinking about the redevelopment of the building and the town as a whole. They may not listen very much or even answer the telephone. So what you're doing, but eventually they come around, and because they will look at this asset at a certain point in time and say, you know, what should we really do with this? One of the things I think you should be careful about doing is suggesting that these are bad people, they're doing wrong things, why are they being so mean? No, they manufacture things. So you want to make sure that you're communicating with them in a positive way, that you are working with them to make a better future, and don't get upset if they are a little bit unresponsive, because that's just the way these kinds of things are. We've seen it again and again. They're just different kinds of neighbors than other kinds of neighbors. So I think that whole civic communications process has been very positive, and you should continue exactly what you're doing. You will be successful with this. I'm convinced. Yes, sir.
Doesn't any historic district require the approval of a majority of the residents, and what's that percentage?
No. It actually requires, no vote, it actually requires 51% to defeat it now. There is no vote to pass it, because nothing changes, you know, there's no restrictions. But to defeat a National Register district requires that 51% of the property owners submit notarized letters opposing it. So, silence is assumed as a yes vote. So you have to actively, 51% of the property owners have to actively oppose it in order to defeat it. Rarely happens. Rarely happens.
And yeah.
It's,
Because it doesn't compel anything, and it provides opportunities that people want to take advantage of them. There are certain circumstances where, for example, if federally owned property and there's a federal action on property, then the federal government has put constraints on itself. And people generally think that's a pretty good thing, so the federal government preserves the national resources.
well,
But that's not our situation here.
Well, for example, in the state, if it's in a national register, you're also automatically in the state register. It's two laws, one state, one federal, that basically says whenever there's state or federal money in a project, they have to take into account the effect on properties that are in or eligible for the National Register. So you would be in the National Register. There's no question about whether it's for or not, eligible for or not. So if, for whatever reason, somebody in DOT woke up one morning and said, There's a lot of traffic on this road, let's make it a 6-lane highway. Section 106, which is what the federal law is called, would immediately come into effect. They've got to involve the community, and you guys would be down there with pitchforks and torches. I mean, it would look like a scene out of Young Frankenstein.
But I think the key idea is it does provide actually the community with a certain number of opportunities, protections relative to state and federal actions that would degrade the historic resources. So, again,
Even cell
good
towers.
things. Yes.
All right, I'm just curious, kind of probably not really important, but the structures that you have where the current parking lot is adjacent to like the train station. Now, you talked about the facade of the current, you know, the Unilever as being kind of like important in branding to Clinton. Do not those obstruct that view as like you come around and also too, if you're riding the train, like you can't see, like you can't jazz that part of it if it's all blocked by those.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We went back and forth on it. The reason we put it there was to add some retail use right there by the train station. But
Are they multi-story or single-story or?
that is a 2-story structure. The others are shown as 3-story structures, except for these, which are also 2-story structures here.
I think you've got a good point. We went back and forth on that, even the view, you can see it coming around the bend and seeing that as you come along Central and you see that facade, it's really a spectacular thing. So maybe it should be more open. The idea of having retail or other kinds of uses, it could also be that that's part of what happens to the ground floor. Wouldn't it be great to have a restaurant with a cafe right there by the train? That's something we should, one of the things though, we're not so sure is great is just to have a great big parking lot there either.
No, I think a great green
Green
space
wouldn't
with
it?
like a fountain or something.
Sure, that's a good
I think it's an important point that it could become a standard in the district as well, that there's no new development or construction in front of the facade. It's more consistent with the overall narrative that we're talking about with the importance of that facade.
The brewery can go across the
You're
street.
right about that.
In the office.
It'd be like a sort of a
Yeah, right
Parisian
there.
park with sort of a Parisian park with deco fountains.
Right, right, yeah. Or you can make a subterranean restaurant and then the green on top.
It just gets your whole story.
Keep going. No, the amphitheater is in Witch Hazel Park with a circle around it.
I think one of the things that should illustrate though, and Josh has pointed this out, is that there's actually quite a lot of land. And if we look at relatively modest growth in some stages over time, you could put quite a bit of interesting development here with the woods and the buffers from existing uses, add trails. There's a lot of land here. Distributing it properly, but probably our thought is to keep it clustered around the existing building closer to the town center, makes for better links and gives you both open space and development opportunities, so it doesn't scatter.
Yes, Steve, one of the things that we've talked about, and it's missing, I think, was you show the green space in the middle, but we had talked about circulation through there, so that you have an optional way to get to the north, a pedestrian route to the north.
Yeah, and that's something, I was thinking about the same thing, and we keep forgetting to put this line on there, but the idea, we had to figure out a way to find, to thread a spot there, but the idea was perhaps to be a pedestrian way or bicycle way, so that one could reach out to the northern end.
Well, as it turns out, and when I was doing my research for the National Register, this little piece of land, this little triangle across from the gas station, belongs to Unilever.
Oh, it does?
Wow. There you have your gateway.
Oh, okay, there's a gateway there. Oh, good. Does Unilever, every single workshop, I keep drawing that, put it in there, and then put it on there, yes, sir.
Going back to the point you made just a little bit ago about, manufacturers and making products, maybe you could just give us a little insight into where we stand. Does Unilever still own this?
Yes.
And do they have, they are a key to all of this, right?
Correct.
What is our relationship with them at this moment?
Well, we've reached out to them on multiple occasions. What they've done is they've brought on board a brokerage, a leasing brokerage group, to sort of manage and help handle the property. And so we've reached out both to the company and through the brokerage with really very little response at all, virtually none at this point. Why would that be happening? Fundamentally, if you take a look at this, it's not likely, but they have a zoned property with access that's not too bad a condition, and somebody might come along and release it to make face cream or whatever, to make something here. So they've got the sign up, in effect, to say, let's see if for very little cost we can refill it, everybody wins. What the chances of that, well, we predict the chances of that happening is extremely low, because there is a huge amount of space like this on the market within reasonable distances and access. There's millions of square feet of space like this within 30 or 40 miles. So, and unfortunately, the demand for manufacturing space of large scale in this part of the country and the country generally is just, it's going down, it's not going up. So, but their stance for a while is going to be, put up a sign and see if you can catch somebody. The brokerage company doesn't have any interest really in the redevelopment side of things. We ran into this in a number of different companies. The company itself, they're trying to figure out how to compete internationally and make whatever they make more of and make better and make more money. The real estate cost, even with the taxes here, in their overall business plan is nothing.
Right.
It's just not even on their radar.
Right.
And to take some of their senior management and start to focus on this is to take away from their business.
Right.
So, given all of those kind of factors, it's understandable that they'll just be kind of quiet and lazy about it. But what happens is that redevelopers start to see this. So people who are smart and are looking for properties that are very strategically located will be starting to knock on the door of Unilever and say, gee, here's a town that's proactively doing things. This is a well-positioned spot. I won't make your day more difficult. Let's figure out a way to get this off of your hands.
Right.
There's one other factor in here that I want to emphasize, and I'm sure it will come up in conversation here anyway, and that has to do with the environmental conditions, hazardous materials on the site. We know what we can learn from the established files, the public state files, on what the environmental conditions, and there's nothing that comes up in those files that is necessarily really scary about this. There have been some problems in the past in terms of activities, but and corrective activities and fees, etc. But one of the things that we don't know, and it's not unlikely, it's frequently the case that the owner actually does not know whether there are serious problems on the site. There are reasons why they don't look into this in more detail that have to do with if you do locate something, sometimes you pull it out right away. And so if you're not contemplating a change, you leave well enough alone. But the long and the short of it is that those kinds of barriers to redevelopment get overcome all the time. And if the value, let's say that it costs $2 million to clean up the property, but somebody, when they look at the redevelopment, would be willing to buy it for $5 million, well, what happens is that they sell it for $5 million and $2 million going cleaning up the land. They really only got $3 million for the deal. Okay, still works. Let's say the cleanup is $7 million, and somebody would want to buy it for $5 million. It sits there and stuck. So to keep those things from happening, there are a number of programs, including the state brownfield programs and other kinds of ways of bringing financing in, bringing public support for those, and we're redeveloping those all the time. It's a little more complicated as a way to get there, but one of the key steps, I don't know if Brandon, you want to talk about this or not, but one of the key aspects of what the state has been doing and Connecticut Trust is building up a program is to focus on seeing how those challenges can be identified and to bring public support for taking care of those problems. They may be a challenge out there. We're not going to know ahead of time. You want to be proactive and positive about it, but it isn't a deal breaker. It's a deal elongator. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Brad Schide, Connecticut Trust, Historic Preservation. Yeah, what we're doing as an organization, I mean, just somebody asked what's the next steps. I mean, I think Steve laid out that, you know, why we're not, I mean, the fact that we're not getting feedback from Unilever doesn't mean they're not interested. But as he said, what we're trying to do as an organization is find sites like this, and we do actually have a mill program that we're looking at too. But try, as Steve said, all we're doing is trying to create the environment so that eventually this owner will wake up one day and say, okay, well, I can get my price, you know. But related to that is all the environmental, and most developers are not going to come in here and build this without knowing what the environmental costs are. So the other piece of this, and this is not just, Connecticut Trust can't fund all this. You know, part of what I think we need to do, if you guys are really embracing this concept, is that we need to get to Unilever, and we need to really, there's Brownsfield money, there's state money, and towns can apply for that. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to come from the town. There's state and federal dollars, Brownsfield money, that can help in this situation. The problem is we don't quite know what's all there. So there's also that step. So I think the next step is to try to get to Unilever, but also at the same time, you know, we have a mill project which we'd like to, you know, follow up with Alan on here and try to work to identify more of the environmental hazards. But until you get the zoning, the environmental, some of the historic in place, this is never going to happen. So.
And I don't think it's something that, like you say, we're involved with, we've seen mills like this, even with significant environmental issues, are being redeveloped all the time. It's a matter, and there are all kinds of funding, financing, insurance programs have been developed to do it. The people who are sophisticated enough to work with a property like this are usually sophisticated, they help figure that out. But it will be part of the conversation, and we can extend the process potentially considerably. But we have no reason, we haven't seen anything yet that would say, oh my goodness, there are places that we've seen which started out as Superfund sites.
I mean, the two things we are in control of is the planning and zoning and applying for the historic site, right?
That's right.
I mean, we don't have to worry. Now, is there any barrier from ponds against naming that a historic site? Are they out of the picture? Do they count part of the 51%? They do. Is it weighted by how much land they own? It's just one vote?
One vote, one property.
So, I mean, we really could move ahead with the P and Z, applying for the stuff, get that in order.
Okay. That's right. And the thing about Unilever is that because of just whether not understanding it or corporate resistance, it's like if today looks like tomorrow and today was okay, don't change anything, can be part of what's going on. So being able to put that in place for their benefit is in your hands.
And I've seen attorneys, corporate attorneys at the State Historic Review Board, and they just basically tell them to sit down and shut up because that's not what they do. You know, this is what they do. The process. Their job is to say, does it meet the standards for the National Register? And if it does, it goes to the Park Service.
Jonathan is economic development. You know, the beginning of I wish we owned that property.
Oh yeah.
You know, this property at the moment they make our town very happy. And that's our dream to any project we come to that property. I do not know really as you know, to you guys, what kind of source or force we can have to the Unilever to accept this project. And the other thing is, you guys did not mention about this view is about the water line, the sewer line, about the sewer, all the stuff. Do we have any problem for that? Because town of Clinton, we have the sewer problem.
Understanding that there's no public sewage on the site, the basic idea is that there are packaged treatment plants that can be associated with this type of development that involve a septic leaching field and individual septic plants that could service clusters of this kind. We've done site plans for affordable housing developers that have been very similar in layout to this, which are done with packaged treatment plants. And the development entity would full well understand that as a part of this context and work that into their pro forma.
It's a little bit more difficult in Connecticut than it is in Massachusetts, for example. It's a little harder to get through. Even though the technology of these package plants is really well advanced, so it can add time and some permitting process, but there's nothing fundamental in the way.
I've seen it done in New York.
And the Department of Housing and DEP are now negotiating over the Massachusetts, adopting the Massachusetts standards.
Oh, are they? Oh,
Yeah,
good.
because they finally recognized that they want to build transit-oriented affordable housing. It's not going to happen with the current
Yeah.
standards.
So we were working in Wellfleet, if you know, little town of Wellfleet way out there, and they bought an abandoned, it was a church and a parish house as a town right in the town center, and they wanted to rehab it for community building and some affordable housing. We're talking about a small thing, and because they didn't have any town sewer, we found it was worthwhile. You could actually build this package treatment plant to handle a community center, 4 or 5 housing units, and then 4 or 5 other houses that had old septic fields that were being ruined, you know, and you could, it was affordable. I mean, it was easily done. So these things are really good solutions today.
Steve, I'd like to mention that first thing we did when we started this project, we wrote to the chairman of Unilever, who's on the UN Council on Sustainability. Yeah. And who has brought the company, has this huge sustainability statement, sustainability plan. The one thing that it doesn't talk about, of course, is facilities like this and the legacy, pre-sustainability. That's where we started. We never even got a response to that letter. And we've invited Unilever and their real estate agent to every single meeting and sent them every single piece of information that we've generated so far. So, you know, while they may not be here, they are not unaware of what's going on.
I just had a quick question on the zoning. So it's currently industrial zoning where it is, and to change that to the mixed use or residential zoning, how does that impact Unilever since they own that property? I mean, if they are under the assumption that it's industrial, can it be changed?
Oh, yeah.
Or,
Oh, yeah. I mean, and this is something
without their
that kind of
permission
interesting too. My guess is that they really will pay attention when you put the zoning petition. There will be an attorney that will appear, or two, and their immediate reaction may be, at first would be resistant, but if you stop and think about it, they're very restricted with the zoning they have today. This is going to increase the value, increase the opportunity. Why wouldn't they want to do that? And by the way, we're not suggesting, I don't think that we would restrict it from being industrial use. The right kind of industrial use, and
Just
it
add
could be
you.
okay.
Okay, it
But
doesn't-
it adds
doesn't
choice,
take it
it
away.
adds choice.
We actually agreed on that policy
Yeah.
at the last meeting.
Yeah.
That, you know, we're not gonna take industrial out. It's there and they have the building now, so it's grandfathered, but we're not gonna take it out.
Okay.
In case, just if we, you know,
There's
somebody comes
There's
along.
some small details about tax liability that are worth puzzling through a little bit, because part of the way the tax assessors look at properties, they look at its potential value based on zoning compared to what it is today. So if you own a piece of land that doesn't have a house on it, but it's zoned single-family residential, it has more value than one that can't be built on, right? It's not impossible that you'd actually be increasing the value of the land in tax assessment. They probably wouldn't like that, but you probably would. So it's really a small piece of the puzzle, but you should be aware that there may be some questions about that. Yes.
How critical is remodeling the train station to this whole plan? If that didn't go forward,
Yeah, it's not critical. It's not critical. What's great, what's key is having a train station there, and you have one. But having the double platform and the crossover would be great to have. But the way we tend to look at it is that if someone wanted to locate a business here, or to live here, and let's say work down at one of the hospitals in New Haven, they're not going to say, gee, I can't walk across the track on an overhead walkway. I don't think I'm gonna live in Clinton or put my business. It's not enough of an incentive. But every time you spend money and improve the infrastructure, the quality of it, the better off you are. So that's not to say you shouldn't advocate it, you shouldn't.
Yeah, I would like to add that I've spent the last month running down the status of the train station because it was taken off the current list, and even the guy who's responsible for doing the bid documents at the state didn't know it had been taken off the list. It evidently has been taken off the list for one reason. Between the letting of the contracts for the Westbrook station and the present day, the standards changed for the elevation of the bridges over the electrical lines. So the DOT is negotiating with Amtrak over the height of, and that's what's tied up. That's the only obstacle. It's still in the plan, it's not in the budget, but that's where it stands.
I think that our states are New England states.
It's basically that, what the distance is going to have to be.
Yeah, it will happen. These are fundamental parts of our growth, our community, and good transportation. The states are all aligned on that in New England. It's just a matter of time. Any other questions?
In a perfect world, how long does this take?
A day.
90 days.
In a really perfect world.
Or in your experience?
5 years.
5 years, really?
That's good. Yeah. 5 years.
Well, time to lose, this is the time.
By the time you started right now. You know, it's gonna take you 6 months to get zoning in place. It's gonna take a year to get all the environmental agreements, the studies understood, so that all of that due diligence is accomplished. It's gonna take a solid year to get all the design work done. Then you've got construction on top of that. And the other part of it is what we call absorption. The way this would, that's what the phasing, the thing about how quickly you do it. If you build all at once, well, there'd be half of the units or some of the office space would be empty for a while. So what you do is you build it as they come. And the build out would be, we think, relatively rapid. But when I say 5 years, you could know, it would not amaze me if in 6 months, I mean, if I saw a headline, people just sent you a headline from Clinton, and the developer has stepped forward and Unilever's worked out a deal, the zoning's in place, and they're working on the brownfields deal. 6 months from now, that could happen. In other words, it can happen very quickly to get it rolling. And all we're trying to do is to get the first couple of steps easy. Yeah, it takes a while. It is a lot to do. Yeah.
I'm concerned about traffic flow from the Post Road part of town. I mean, they're just really two narrow tunnels we go
Yeah.
to.
Well, I guess, I mean, this is a little bit outside of, what we've been asked to do. We're aware of it. But in terms of the development volume, it's actually, in terms of increased traffic, it's insignificant compared to the amount of traffic that you have. It isn't that much. The problem is really an existing condition. You've got congested, poorly, although you've got one of the bigger signs I've seen around here. That's really outstanding. I'm not even tempted to go straight.
I can't say it because people have been.
Yeah. So I do think you have, and it's quite a puzzle because you've got the houses that are really clustered around here and the conditions. One of the things, well, up in Windsor, for example, as part of working on their town center, and Master Plan, we pointed out that even though it's going to be wildly expensive, because they've got a very narrow stone underpass underneath the bridge there, that really, when the rail gets improved as these improvements, there really ought to be a bigger picture that this probably shouldn't last for the next century. So we would encourage you to continue to pursue that because it would be good for the town right now if it happened. But there's nothing that would be necessary to absorb this kind of development. They would also have that strange term.
I know the state is doing that because they're doing it in two, they just did it in Rowayton, in one section of Norwalk, and they're attempting to do it in another. So the state and Metro North or Shoreline East, whoever it is up here, they have active projects to widen and improve these kinds of roads. So most of the time people are not down there asking for it, I don't think, but you can be the first.
And there's actually an even simpler approach, which is to look at our existing traffic flow and the signage. Like, where does signage direct people when you get off exit 63? Or if you go to exit 62 or 64, other alternative routes you can take there to get into Clinton. Currently, 62 and 64 don't even note that they're Clinton exits. So that's something on the state level to address. And that could change the whole traffic flow.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yes?
I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to articulate this too well, but have you, not necessarily your group worked on it, but if your group did, or you know of an existing development area that is kind of similar to this, that was based in a small town that has not socioeconomic status as Fairfield County has? Because I often hear, oh, well, you can't have this type of thing because it's not, we don't have enough money in this area or enough population to support it. So I'm just curious if it is a successful plan for our size and for the money that's in this area.
Newmarket, New Hampshire.
I'm sorry?
Newmarket, New Hampshire.
Okay, yeah.
Go look them up. Yeah, it's
No, I
amazing what they've done with renovation of old mills. In that case, the town actually, there were back taxes on fantastic but really decrepit mills. They created a little community development corporation. They got the properties for very little money, like $1, because they were back taxes. And they've steadily, through a nonprofit, basically their own town nonprofit, been redeveloping these things, putting together financing packages. It's absolutely remarkable. What they've done things that big cities haven't been done. And I keep thinking it's because nobody told them it's hard to do. They just, they just did it.
Well,
They
that's
formed
what
a
I'm
committee
trying to
and did
think
it.
is that,
And it's so
okay.
fantastic, and it's a beautiful town. They have several hundred housing units of different types, senior housing units and market rate with connections. And now they're taking on their little downtown, which is right next door. So I think that's a remarkable example of how a relatively small town. It's not too far from Portsmouth, but it's hardly a suburb. It's certainly a long way from Boston. It's more like where you are. But I think Fairfield County is a special case, but you're kind of a special case too, because you're not that far from New Haven, and the whole corridor from New Haven north to Hartford and beyond is starting to really redevelop. I mean, this is really a moving part of the Connecticut economy. And I mean, we've been tracking this up through New London, up into Rhode Island, the southern portions of Rhode Island. We think this corridor is a very significant long-term growth corridor with extremely high value because the amenities that are here, and you're actually really close to it. You can hop on a train and be in New York, in New Haven in no time, not to mention Providence and Boston. So when you take a look at this, it's not like you're out in the sticks. You really aren't. And you're steps away from this great big Long Island Sound thing. So I really do think that as you take a look at this, the challenge is you're in a kind of a relative, somewhat lower market, but this property is large enough and spectacular enough that somebody's going to say, this is sort of, it has potential, and it's definitely be part of the town, but it's going to be new and better and improved. It's going to help shift the town's image a little bit too. It's that kind of an opportunity. It's going to be a good thing.
I agree. I have a feeling, listening to what you've all the ideas you've suggested, that it would be like kind of a field of dreams if you build it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
And it's just, you've done, preserving the green areas, conserving the historic buildings, making it pedestrian friendly, building in different kinds of residential opportunities, having it right by the railroad station. I just think all of the important things that make for a livable city the ideas are there, and it's such a beautiful piece of property, and Clinton has so much potential.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just lying there.
yeah.
It's just, you
Well,
know, it's sad. But
Well,
my thought
one of the
also was,
things
is
that
it gonna happen in my lifetime?
5 years.
But I do think, one thing that's been really interesting is the fact that towns that go through a long economic low spot are the ones that preserve the historic buildings. And now they're beginning to be revalued in a way that are really pushing them in totally new directions. I was thinking about the town that's up the pike. But if you think about
Adams?
no, the seaport town, well, in any case, now I'm going to quit. Mystic. If you look at Mystic and what's happening there in some of the older properties, and they're still relatively affordable, but it's really caught on. It's really become a very different place than it was 10 years or even 20 years ago. And it's generating its own energy now. And actually, New London is amazing what's happening in New London. So I think that when you take a look at it, I think you're really well positioned and you're fortunate. And our concern, what the Connecticut Trust concern is that when redevelopment starts to rise, the older buildings start to come down and you lose the very qualities that draw people here in the first place. So hold on to these long-term, big-time assets.
Yeah, because there's no restriction to what you can do in a National Register district, but on the other hand, it gives you a lever. It gives you a lever. If you love the place, it gives you a lever to say, yeah, this really is important. We're not making this up. This is important. And and there's a whole neighborhood kind of spirit that can grow from that. And that can sort of infect the entire town.
We moved here from Guilford in 2008, and at this point, we're contemplating moving back to Guilford because of, and in town, because of, we can walk to a grocery store, we can, walk to church. We're actually, we're close to town, we're in town now, but the fact is that, Clinton, we came here thinking of all this potential, and the main street was gonna, turn into like a Greenport, or Bogus,
Yeah.
and it's kind of dragged its feet. So the reason we're at the meeting is kind of, do we bother hanging around here and hope it's gonna happen? Or, are we gonna go back to the community that we came from where, it has exactly what we're looking for, and, so, like I said, we don't have any markets or anything we can walk to, in the center of town. Maybe, if you have residential and you bring that close to the center of town,
Yeah, exactly.
those kind of units, then they're gonna want a market, that you want, like Guilford Food Center.
Right.
And, so.
I think, the difficulty is it does take time. One of the things that I found very helpful is to actually get engaged in that process, which Todd has done in his own community, and Norwalk is a fantastically different place than it was 20 years ago. In my own town. But I do think that as we take a look at the downtown of the town, there are other things that will continue to be done to revitalize the town. There's lots to do. And there's never a silver bullet. Like if there was a development here, you still have to get facade improvements and maybe a little bit better stores in a few locations.
We gotta get Trader Joe's, Whole Foods.
Right. It's going to Guilford. Trader Joe's is now.
But we've always found it's really rewarding as people get involved in the community, because then it's their community.
That's why it's so wonderful we've had a great turnout tonight. Because we need people to
I
do
would like
it.
to say thank you very much for you guys to come here to give us a nice presentation. We do love this plan, very nice. The problem is the next couple of months, you will see that we got a big project, more than $60 million, we're going to make a big school. Now, this project is very ugly. We have to do something to bring some businesses coming here to pay taxes, to enjoy ourselves. And I would like to say thank you very much for your presentation. That was excellent. What we can do, town of Trenton, to that project is too.
Well, again, I think the zoning is very important, the historic district is very important. Continue to advocate at the state level, to communicate through your state legislative delegation, to work with people like Kip Bergstrom. And from our standpoint, this word of mouth, the buzz gets out. Clinton can be a happening place, and we'll do what we can. Thank you very much.
Again, thanks everybody.
Yeah, Alan, before everybody goes, I'm hearing lots of great energy about this plan, so what I'm thinking, Alan, we didn't rehearse this, but maybe our next steering committee meeting, we can maybe form a committee called Unilever Committee, where we can actually bring some of you and some of this energy. I mean, we need to get to Unilever.
Right now.
That's a good idea, yes.
Well, yeah, but we need people involvement. I don't want just one, and we can also talk about Brownsfield money and what the town can do to help. Again, there's state money out there. KIP has some of it, but the state has money to do this. So does that make sense, Alan? I mean, I'll ask you.
You're the number one there, that's a good idea, we have to make a committee.
Yeah, the brownfield grants for this year were just announced, and in May and June, they're gonna start a new round of funding.
Well, we can actually review that at the next meeting. So can we'll let you all know, we'd love to have you all come to the next meeting. Hey.